Welcome to the Narrate podcast, where we aim to tell God's story with our lives. We'll be continuing to post the Sunday message each week, but we want to dive a little deeper and offer some content to supplement your life with God, and that's where our Beyond Sunday series comes in. Join Adam and Narrate staff as they provide thoughtful discussions, ideas, and interviews that go beyond the message you'll hear on Sunday. Hi, Narrate. What you're going to hear in this episode is the question and response session that follows Adam's discussion on his choosing of an Anglican identity in the last Beyond Sunday episode titled A People Connected to History and a People Alive. Adam is joined in this Q&R with Hannah Drga, Narrate's hospitality pastor, who's been on staff for 8 years. She's also been a part of these discussions on Anglican foundations for the past several years with Adam. We also want to name that this podcast is currently being recorded in our office space, so you might hear people walking, bustling around in downtown life. Just know that we're working hard to improve the quality as we go, so thanks for your grace with that. With that, I hope you enjoy this question and response session from Adam and Hannah.
I just have all these questions from people. I have no idea who these are, so if I butcher it, I'm sorry. First one, what do Anglicans do differently liturgically, if anything, compared to evangelicals on a Sunday morning and gatherings?
It's such a broad question.
I know.
Because there's high Anglicans, there's low Anglicans. Like our friend Chris, who will be here in October, if you were to go online and watch Trinity, you wouldn't notice a marked difference between their gatherings and our own.
Mm-hmm.
But then, of course, you've been to some high Anglican, I guess it was technically Episcopalian.
Right.
What was that like?
That's very different from Narrate.
How so?
I'm not. I just don't have the vocabulary. So if I'm accidentally insulting, I'm sorry. But the robes, the procession in, the carrying of the cross and the Bible. It was like a golden Bible. Mm-hmm. Candles, incense. The guy whipping around the incense. It was shocking. It's just very, formal. It felt very rigid. Was
that different? Because you grew up Lutheran. Was that different than what you experienced?
Yeah, that was very different for me. I mean, we were liturgical and the pastors wore robes and we would recite certain things and follow the church calendar really closely. But it was more relaxed, maybe, in feel.
So what I love about C4SO is, taken as a whole, it feels like this awesome representation of historic Anglicanism, because there are within C4SO, the language they use, and I don't know if it's insulting either, is high up the candle. And there's pretty high up the candle people, and then there's very low on the candle people. And then when I went to that clergy conference, Teresa and I April, what I loved seeing was those two crews mixing together. So mm-hmm. as a whole, it's very diverse. Mm-hmm. And yet it seems like what's rare is to have that much diversity and yet mutuality and respect and honoring of one another.
Wait, real quick, can you break down the high up the candle, low up the candle thing?
Yeah, well, so there's a guy at Narrate, his name's also Adam, who
mm-hmm.
just told me he came from an Anglican church in Arizona, and I said, so how high up the candle? And he
mm-hmm.
said, well, they did incense.
Is that high?
I was above the candle.
That's above the candle. Got it.
Almost literally. So high up the candle is what you're talking about,
okay.
vestments and all of the liturgical pieces, which personally I've grown to respect the role that they play. And I've talked with people who will kind of walk you through, this means this and this means that. I still think that if my life was blown up and suddenly I found myself living in Austin, Texas and working at a bank, I think I'd want to go to a higher up the candle church, but I have no inclination to lead one. Hmm. So personally, specific to Helena, but I think in general, especially for Helena, I don't have any desire to lead one. And I don't know if I was in Atlanta where I could go to Chris's church or a high Anglican church, I'd probably end up picking Chris's, but it doesn't threaten me on a personal worship level. I can respect it. I don't want to lead it, and I don't see it fitting in Helena anytime soon, if ever.
Mm-hmm.
But I still think there's some neat things about it. So what was the question? Because we may have completely strayed from it.
I think we got to it. It was speaking liturgically, Anglicans, evangelicals.
Yeah.
What are some of the things Narrate has adjusted to that are more Anglican?
I love this question, and we've talked about this.
Yeah.
I love this question because when I look in the mirror, one of the things I feel really strongly about is there aren't things that I'm doing because I became Anglican. I became Anglican because there were things that I was already doing. So, and we experienced this together, but you go back to COVID and those early years or early days, and all of a sudden we started doing the Matthew series, which quickly became an 18-month series where we worked our way slowly through Matthew. Now, that's not the lectionary, but it has a similar vibe where what you're going to study, what you're going to read that week is given to you. It's not selected topically per your choosing, which we still do some of the topical too. And then, do you remember the early conversations around communion and whether or not to do that? And we were all like, what do you remember about like just the feeling that we had about that when we first launched into it?
I remember the conversations around, gosh, if people are showing up on Sunday mornings, it means something, or it's costing something, or it's affecting a relationship or community. And so there was this desire to like form this routine and this structure around communion. Like I remember being all for it.
Because there was something that we couldn't do alone in our homes.
Correct.
Yeah, I remember there was an N.T. Wright podcast where he was asked this question of what about taking Eucharist by yourself at home? And he said he basically made allowance for lots of ways to do Eucharist, but then he's like, but to do it alone is oxymoronic.
Right.
And I think that kind of drove us, but we had no idea where that would lead. Here we are we at 4 years now where we've been doing it every week?
Yeah.
And I think if we took it away, there'd be a rebellion. What do you think?
Yeah, I think so.
And I don't think I'd personally want to attend a church where we didn't do Eucharist every week. But here's another example. Like, not all Anglican churches do Eucharist every week. Some do it monthly, some do it bi-weekly, some do it less. Like, that's not a mandate. So when you ask the question, what are we doing differently? To me, those are both examples of, those are things that we were doing before I even knew what Anglicanism was. And in that conversation with Chris, what started happening was this like, whoa, that's Anglican. That's Anglican. And I don't even like calling it Anglican, like it's ancient Christianity. It's these, we were finding these rhythms that Christians have mostly done since the beginning of the church. But can you think of anything that we specifically do because of Anglicanism?
That came after the
Yeah.
label, so to speak. No.
Yeah. The closest thing I can come is consecration. I remember when I first started paying closer attention to listening to others and reading stuff around Eucharist, and I remember asking Chris, like, what is this consecration thing? Which is technically the inviting the Holy Spirit to come and turn the bread and the wine into sacrament. And it's very sacramental. And even then, Chris walked me through, and not all Anglicans would agree with him on this, but Adam, like, know the consecration prayer, like, understand the heart behind it, and then put it in your own words in a way that doesn't freak your people out. So I think technically consecration is something that I do every week because of Anglicanism, but I don't think unless I said that people would even know that's what we're doing. But so I think the bigger question being asked there is like, what are we doing different? And I can't think of anything that's specific to Anglicanism. I can think of lots of things that are specific to, we were a church that was 500 and some and then was 30 some after COVID, and this kind of permission to reinvent who we were and how we worshiped.
In a way that mattered post 2020.
Yeah, and I think we did the work as a staff of, okay, Lord, what from our past do we need to like repent of and own as dysfunctional? And if I'm being honest, this might just be because I'm proud. There wasn't much, if anything, that I identified there, but there was this, like, that cultural moment is over, and we need to move into this new cultural moment, which is less about like self-help Christianity and more about helping people who are really in the room trying to follow Jesus. and then doing our outreach by way of hospitality and kindness and less overt things.
Right. Should we move to another question?
Sure.
Okay. Did you have any concerns about leading Narrate into Anglicanism, or maybe would you even say that's a correct question?
Right. So you're, another pastor on staff and a long tenured pastor. How would you answer that? Because in many ways you've been in the supporting role. Mm-hmm. Meaning like you've supported me in this, but have you had any concerns?
Not outright. I would say I'm just always a slow adopter. Like, I'm cautious. I'm not the first one to jump into anything. And so, but nothing has come up that's like a huge red flag or hugely concerning to me. I think in my own kind of faith journey the past 4 years, and my desire to be more tied to the history of Christianity, I think it's kind of flowed nicely for me, but I'm always going to be like more suspicious of anything. That's just who I am.
Yeah. And I've really respected that. I think you've played that role really well for me and for us, of being trusting and supportive, but also asking good questions and at times pumping the brakes. I think, obviously, I think we both are thinking about this when you ask the question, is I'm not actually trying to lead. I don't think we're trying to lead Narrate into being Anglican necessarily. And it may come to our being an Anglican church. I really don't. I don't have a keen sense of that, and that's not the goal. But even these podcasts, one friend in particular was like, "Why would you do this? Like, why are we stirring this up?" And I think I'm pretty clear with myself. Like, my motive is not to persuade Narrate towards Anglicanism, but it is to persuade them towards these values of something alive and connected to history. It is to bring them these values of what we'll talk about in the coming weeks around missionality and just the kindness of Anglicanism. I'm trying to think of the word that I actually used, the modesty of it. So, not intending to make Narrate Anglican, are intending to turn it towards ancient Christianity. And I think we were doing that way before I knew what Anglicanism was. I think.
Yeah, I would agree. What's been your greatest joy of this journey for the last several years?
Oh man, that's a good question. I think the last 4 years we shared as a staff was incredibly bonding and fun, and we all agreed pretty early on that we're a church plant again, and so all those conversations and working out that, I very much have enjoyed that. And then what's been very confirming to me about C4SO is their relationality, like their desire to be in relationship. My connections with Chris, I got a text Tuesday from a guy named Drew in Atlanta who's like, "Hey, how did Sunday go?" And I was like, "Why are you asking?" And he's like, "I don't know, I just was randomly asking." I was like, "Oh, okay, well, thank you. That's very kind." But so I think along with what this has created as a staff, it definitely has satiated my need and desire for a professional community that I feel connected to, and that we can learn from and steal from and differentiate from, and that's been super fun.
Mm-hmm. Definitely. I don't quite understand this next question, so I'm just going to read it.
Okay.
And you can tell me what it means. This quote, "You've had a gather-scatter, decentralized approach at Narrate rather than guilt-tripping people into finding their calling by checking the serving God box, by volunteering for weekend services. Do you think Anglicanism supports that?" Unquote.
Yeah.
I'm not quite sure where that's going.
This person who's asking it has a long history with me, and so I respect that.
Great.
I think what he's getting at is he knew that the heartbeat behind Narrate from the very beginning was this. I would often say, like, let's gather and let's scatter, let's get out of here. And there doesn't have to be a cross in the logo for your serving to be valid. So we were trying to validate people's ordinary, everyday, organic lives, both relationally and professionally and otherwise. And I think what I'm hearing in that question is, has this created this pressure now for people to properly volunteer in church? And you're the one that leads the hospitality team. How would you answer that? Does there feel like there's new pressure to you?
No. Mm-mm. I guess maybe I got hung up on the decentralized word.
Mm-hmm.
Like, that doesn't make sense to me.
But see, I think, and I couldn't have said this, I'm going to say this on Vision Weekend in a couple weeks.
Okay.
I couldn't have said this until it all happened, but I do think my attitude towards church, and by proxy then Narrate's up until COVID, was this attitude of Sunday morning's not very important. What's really important is your own personal relationship with Jesus, but we're going to be so darn good at it that you wouldn't dare miss it. And I think part of what like just crushed our soul then when we came back in March was suddenly there was 30 people in the room, and this realization of, oh, on some level that didn't work.
Mm-hmm.
And so I wonder if part of what this person is asking then just has to do with, is Sunday morning and being connected to church community more valuable and important to you now than it was before? And my answer to that question is yes. I think this is what we experienced in COVID, is when you trivialize the communal worship experience, I don't think the net result of that was good.
Mm-hmm.
So would you agree that we have a higher value for Sunday morning than we did before?
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think I personally would say that too, because when that was, like, I have this very specific memory from COVID where we were live streaming in Grand Street and there were 5 of us and it was awful.
Mm-hmm.
And I went home after that and I was like drinking coffee in my living room 10:30 on a Sunday morning, and I just remember having this feeling of like, this is not why I do ministry. This sucks.
Mm-hmm.
And realizing when that opportunity to gather together every week was changed, taken away, whatever, like I realized personally how important that was just to me. And then hospitality wise, community wise, like just seeing those interactions on Sunday mornings, seeing the connections that are made, like it's so much more important to me now.
Yeah, I remember in that season talking to a friend, because I think originally we filmed like on Thursday and then aired it on Sunday, or maybe it was the other way around. Maybe we went live for a couple weeks. But I remember talking to a friend in that season who was talking about, like, I love how I get to film this thing on Thursday and then sit in my living room in my pajamas on Sunday and watch it. Oh. And again, this is what made it special for me as a staff, because I remember we all looked at each other and was like, no, like not a moral no, not a like he's wrong no, but a like, if that's what it is, we need to go find other things to do because I don't buy it.
Right.
Or it doesn't resonate with me personally. So do you feel like our scattering effectiveness has changed? Because that may also be behind the question.
That's a
like,
good question.
Are we less effective at scattering?
I would say we've added more of a, like a, how do I say, like I think we still scatter well in that we serve the community well, and I'm excited about some new partnerships that are coming up this fall. Mm-hmm. And also I think we do a better job at helping people create community, because that's not an innate skill, it's very much a learned skill. How do you invite people, gather together with things like the Easter calendar, the swing dancing, the think events, like just being together in relationship. I think we do that much better now. So
are you saying like we still scatter, we still do that common good thing in the community, but we've added this things that are like properly more in reach, meaning we're taking people who already come on Sunday and going, let's do trivia together, or let's do this think event together.
And in my head that's under scattering, but maybe it's a different thing, entity.
Mm-hmm. Well, and then that was definitely a conviction that we took from COVID was we've got to do a better job of helping people find one another.
Yeah.
And it was so easy during COVID because people either wanted relationships or they didn't, or it's not that they didn't, but they didn't feel safe having them. So that was such a fun season, because once you knew who those people that were comfortable being together being with other people were, then it was super fun to create community with them, while not in any way denigrating those who were like, no, I just need to be separate.
Right.
Yeah. Yeah. It's helpful for me to hear that from your perspective, the value for scattering is still there, and at the same time, there's not this shameful kind of thing in the room around, you need to be here. I think I feel that more than I did 10 years ago. But I also think we've talked about this too. We have this responsibility to really be careful about not becoming cynical.
I just like the gather scatter mindset. Like I had a meeting with someone from the Blackfoot a few weeks ago, and she was like, "Oh, your people are in here all the time. Gather scatter, right?" And I was whoa, yeah. I love that.
That's another confirmation of Anglican liturgy, though, because if you were to look closely at the liturgy, I'm about to discredit myself because I don't even know the technical language, but there's this commission that's supposed to happen at the end of the service, which if you were to read it and then say it in your own words, you would say, oh, so we've gathered and now we're scattering. So to me, that's another example of, again, I think Anglican sometimes deserves to be used with a small a, because it's not trying to be proprietary all the time. It's just trying to live within ancient Christian liturgy. And it's not important to them that it's all the exact same everywhere. Bishop Todd has been such a stalwart on that point.
Yeah. So I go back to like what you were talking about earlier about maybe more of an individualized version of Christianity. Is that what falls short for you in evangelicalism? Is that something different? Did something fall short for you? Do you want to unpack
within
that?
evangelicalism?
Yeah.
I don't see this as a subtraction thing. Like I don't have any personal need to denigrate or deconstruct evangelicalism. I think we could have really important conversations about whether or not that word still serves us, because it's such a loaded word today. But to me, this is about addition, not subtraction. That like some of the best and brightest Western 20th century Christians were evangelical Anglicans. C.S. Lewis, N.T. Wright, John Stott, Leslie Newbigin, lesser known, but a huge force in Western Christianity in the last 100 years. They were evangelical and they were ancient or Anglican. So to me, it's really important to me. I'm as prone as anybody to define myself by what I'm not. And I think we've given a lot of energy to making sure this isn't about we're going to find our identity because we're not that anymore. It's we're that plus this. And that's why I love Anglicanism, because at the end of the day, if one is going to become Eastern Orthodox, you're adopting an exclusivist view. Like at the end of the day, you have to say, we are the proper, correct church. And really, if you're being technical with Roman Catholicism, though they tend to be more gracious and kind, and the Second Vatican Council certainly makes this point, but still, pushed into a corner, a Roman Catholic has to say, but yes, we are the pure form of church. It's exclusive. Anglicanism isn't. It's not reaching for exclusivity, which to me is then what pushes me back to my evangelical roots, and it's this willingness to embrace the many good things from evangelicalism and the many good things from Eastern Orthodox and Catholic faith.
Is that what differentiates Anglicanism from like all of these other different versions of Christianity? Its desire to be ecumenical?
I think so.
Or to go, or not exclusive, find your own flavor of this, so to speak?
I think so. I mean, one of these episodes I'm most excited about is, because I think the one that in the end is most compelling to me, along with the history one, is the modesty of Anglicanism, but in helping people listen and them helping us vet this, I realize it needs to go last. But yeah, like I think Anglicanism is awesome in the way that it claims to be ancient, but it does not. As best I can tell, and I'm sure just like anything, there's Anglicans that I'm sure would disagree here, but it doesn't have this internal need to be exclusive. Jesus is exclusive. The gospel is exclusive. But as Bishop Todd says so well and so often, we start with culture and we build liturgy back from that point. So I remember saying to Chris in the early days, boy, Chris, it sure seems like Anglicanism takes the best parts of evangelicalism and the best parts of Eastern Orthodoxy and the best parts of Roman Catholicism, and it just combines them. And he said, yeah, that's both its strength, and to some it's what discredits it. So in that sense, it's very evangelical, because it takes what's useful and tries to submit to precedent and history, but also is pretty pioneering.
Interesting.
Yeah. And I think that's what's hard for people to get their heads around is, like, the only thing we know about Anglicans is from our U.S. history class when they were the bad guys wearing red.
Right.
So it's just such a foreign thing. But that's also where I think it can be kind of fun, because we don't have very many preconceived notions attached to it.
Yeah, I think I had 0.
Yeah. But like Beth Moore, Anglican, Scott McKnight, Anglican, the president of Portland Seminary, where you're a graduate from, she's now Anglican. So it is this thing that's happening, and it's having its moment, and it's going to have to steward that moment like every group does. But it doesn't seem like we're alone in our desire to cling to the parts of our evangelicalism that we're most proud of and animated by, but then also humble ourselves and give dead people a vote in how we think about church. So Easter, I'm maybe getting off on a rant here, but to me, Easter is an example of that. Like, I've always struggled with Christmas Eve and Easter, or Christmas and Easter gatherings. And I think an example where the evangelical value to be cultural and creative meets ancient faith is this realization of, like, wait a minute, like, I don't know that we should be negotiating around some of these readings and some of these particular emphases. Even, frankly, something like Lent or Advent, like, these are these historic things that we do well to hold on to. So it's both.
I think one kind of a defining moment or time period for me in the past few years was when I spoke on Palm Sunday, and I did a lot of research into Holy Week and why, like, I was raised Lutheran, so all of this was very familiar, but I didn't know why it mattered so much. So it was doing the research into, okay, the history of that week and what was happening on these days, and then how we enter into that space today and how we go on this journey, like, with Jesus during his last week on earth. Like, that was really impactful. And I had to I was then looked up a paper I wrote for Dr. Knight's class while I was doing this research on the early process of baptism and how they would be baptized that Saturday before Easter. And so they would enter into this new life, this, like, in this amazing, like, kind of process, and recognize the resurrection on Easter. Like, I was like, these things are meaningful. Like, there's a reason all of this history has come about, or has stayed a part of tradition. Like, to kind of feel that, it was impactful to me to study that.
I wonder if that was part of, and I hate to bring everything back to COVID, but I think for the rest of our lives it probably will.
Right.
I wonder if subconsciously that was part of what COVID did, was, because I remember saying it as in some of our staff meetings, like, we can't cater to the disinterested, because there's, like, sincere Christians who aren't here, let alone, like, there's the disinterested aren't coming to a gathering right now, which it seems like, I'm just kind of thinking out loud as I'm listening to you, it creates this permission then to go, okay, so if we're not going to be overly sympathetic to this notion that someone who really doesn't want to be here is here anyway, so let's make sure that they still get something out of it. With that then comes this permission to more uniformly go, like, okay, so to the extent that you're trying to follow Jesus, let's talk about that. Maybe that doesn't have anything to do with what you're saying, but I just wonder if there was this permission there then to dig in to stuff like you're talking about, because we got to operate on the assumption that the people in the room, they want it. They want to grow. And then slowly get back to recognizing that there are non-Christians in the room and we want them in the room, but even still, and I think this is where your team does such a good job, like, let's win them by way of kindness, or let's share Christ with them by way of hospitality and kindness and relationship, not by giving away iPads and some of the stuff that we did before COVID, the kind of fun, zany, I can't believe this is church stuff, that I'm just not sure still resonates. I don't know.
Yeah, I'm not sure it does either, actually. Do you want to... This is a hypothetical question, but it could be real.
Oh, man.
I don't know. This is... Okay. This is not how this person feels, but they asked this question, which is always a treat.
So they're an Enneagram 9.
I've been an owner and narrate for a while. I've considered thoughtfully over time, and I'm not comfortable with the direction you, and by extension narrate, are being led. What do I do now? What am I to do now?
So this person is hypothetically saying, what if I'm an owner? I have been for a long time. I don't love the direction. What now?
Right.
Oh, man. I think the first thing I would say is, let's talk. I would love to get together and talk that out, though Fred has helped me understand over the years that the reason people don't want to talk when they leave a church is because they get beat up when they do. But I think we do a good job of not beating people up. I also think this is where we grab a hold of something that we believe in our core, which is there's lots of good churches in town. And as much as it would sadden me if someone wanted to leave, I think for reasons you've already cited of like meaningless ritual, it's really important that you do the work personally. And if God is going like, no, it's time to leave, then go find one of those other good churches. Mm-hmm. And yet also not being too quick to do that as well. So I don't know what to say to that other than that makes me sad. It's always a bummer when people leave, but that's going to happen. And I think we got to give those people their dignity and affirm that there's a lot of really good churches in town who do things differently than us.
Mm-hmm. If you'd like to learn more about Narrate Church, find us online at narratechurch.org.
You can also look us up on Facebook or Instagram. Thanks for listening.